Hi, this is Chris McKaylee, and on today's video podcast, I wanted to describe some of the other constitutional provisions that affect the legislature and the legislative branch of government. Now, as you may know, most of the provisions of the California Constitution that affect the legislature are found in naturally Article 4, because Article 4 sets forth the legislative branch of government and the lawmaking process and grants the authority to make laws in the state of California to the legislature. Article 4 contains sections 1 through 28. Now, despite that, there are actually quite a number of provisions found in other articles of the California Constitution that actually affect the duties and powers of the legislature. So, what are some of those other major constitutional provisions that concern the legislature? Article 2, dealing with voting, the initiative, referendum, recall, includes a provision that the legislature defines residence and provides registration and election laws and must prohibit certain improper practices that could affect elections. The legislature also provides for the recall of local officers. Article 9 of the Constitution deals with education. And here the legislature prescribes the qualifications required for county school superintendents, as well as appointment or election of the county boards of education. The legislature has the power to provide for organizing school districts, high school districts, and community college districts. And the legislature may authorize all school districts to carry on programs and activities. In Article 11, dealing with local government, the state is divided into counties, which are deemed to be legal subdivisions of the state. And so the legislature prescribes uniform procedures for county formation, consolidation, and boundary changes. The legislature also provides for county powers, elected county sheriffs, district attorneys, assessors, as well as an elected governing body in each of the 58 counties. Moreover, under Article 11, the legislature prescribes uniform procedures for the formation of cities and provides for city powers. And the legislature provides that the counties perform municipal functions at the request of cities within those counties. Also, under Article 11, the legislature is prohibited from delegating to a private person or body any power to make, control, appropriate, supervise, or interfere with county or municipal corporation improvements, money, or property, or to levy taxes or assessments or perform any municipal functions. And finally, the legislature may prescribe procedures for presentation, consideration, and the enforcement of claims against counties, cities, and their officers, agents, or employees. Under Article 13, dealing with taxation, the legislature may provide for property tax of all forms of tangible personal property, as well as shares of capital stock, evidence of indebtedness, and any legal or equitable interest that's not exempt. Now, this has to be done by a 2/3 vote of each house. That is to classify personal property for different taxation or even for an exemption. In addition, the legislature may exempt from property taxation in whole or in part a number of types of property, such as personal residences for those injured in military service, and property used for religious, hospital, or charitable purposes. Under Article 13, the legislature, by a 2/3 vote, may authorize county boards of supervisors to exempt real property having a full value so low that if it's not actually made exempt, but the total taxes and applicable subventions on that property would amount to less than the cost of assessing and collecting them. The legislature may define open space land, and they must provide that when this land is enforceably restricted to recreation, the enjoyment of scenic beauty, the use or conservation of natural resources, or the production of food or fiber, The legislature under Article 13 may provide for the manner in which a person of low or moderate income who's 62 years of age or older can postpone their ad valorem property taxes on the dwelling owned and occupied by that person or as his or her personal place of residence. The legislature may also provide for the assessment of taxation only on the basis of the use of a single family dwelling and as much of the land as is required for its convenient use and occupation when that dwelling is occupied by an owner and located on land zoned exclusively for single family dwellings or for agricultural purposes. Also, under Article 13, the legislature may authorize local governments to provide for the assessment or reassessment of taxable property that is physically damaged or destroyed. The legislature may provide maximum property tax rates and bonding limits for local governments. And the legislature is prohibited from imposing taxes for local purposes, but they may authorize local governments to impose them. Also, the legislature is prohibited from reallocating, transferring, borrowing, appropriating, or restricting the use of the proceeds of any tax imposed or levied by a local government solely for that local government's purposes. Also, the legislature under Article 13 may tax corporations, including both state and national banks, as well as their franchises, by any method that's not prohibited by the state or federal constitutions. And finally, under Article 13, the legislature may authorize counties, cities, and counties, as well as cities, to enter into contracts to apportion between them the revenue that's derived from any sales or use taxes that are imposed by those local entities and that's collected for them by the state of California. Now, in Article 14, dealing with labor relations, the legislature may provide for minimum wages and for the general welfare of employees. And for those purposes, they may confer on a commission any legislative, executive, or judicial powers. And the legislature is also under Article 14 expressly vested with plenary power that's unlimited by any provision of this Constitution to create and enforce a complete system of workers' compensation by appropriate legislation. In Article 18, it deals with amending and revising the Constitution, and it provides that the legislature, by a 2/3 vote, may propose an amendment or revision of the state constitution, and in that manner can amend or withdraw its proposal. And each amendment is to be voted on separately by the electorate. Also, under Article 18, the legislature, by 2/3 vote, may submit at a general election a question whether to call a convention to revise our state constitution. And then we have Article 20, the last one, which deals with a number of miscellaneous subjects. And here, the legislature is required to protect by law from forced sale a certain portion of the homestead and other property of all heads of families. Members of the legislature and all public officers and employees, executive, legislative, and judicial branches, except certain exemptions, are required to take and subscribe an oath of office before they can enter upon the duties of their respective offices. Under Article 20, the legislature is prohibited from passing any laws permitting the leasing or alienation of any franchise so as to relieve that franchise or property from liabilities of the lessor or grantor or the leasee or the grantee. Legislative term limits are provided for assembly members and senators for a total service time of 12 years, which can be served in either or both houses. The legislature may authorize, subject to some reasonable restriction, the sale in retail stores of alcoholic beverages contained in the original packages. And the Speaker of the Assembly shall be an ex officio member, having equal rights and duties to non-legislative members of any state agency created by the legislature in the field of public higher education. And then all of these provisions, I think, are of interest because they are explicitly granted in the state constitution, and they either provide authority or obviously in other instances, they limit the authority or powers and duties of the legislature in certain specified areas. Now, some of these constitutional provisions are obviously narrow, as you've heard, in their application, but others of them are quite broad. Nonetheless, you should be aware that these are found in the Constitution, not just in Article 4 dealing with the legislative branch of government.